Hello, everyone, and welcome to our final video in our little series of making light utility vehicles. So what I did is I brought ourselves out here to this lovely little Baja rally track. The reason I've done that is we got to test this thing. This is a lovely dune environment. It's really, really bad on the vehicles, and I want to kind of show you how our technology sort of evolved and sort of had an impact on everything that we did. So we started here in the 1940s with our kind of original design here. Obviously, it's been inspired by a couple different things here. And, it was a pretty good vehicle. I think our biggest complaint was it was just underpowered, which doesn't surprise me. So let's go ahead and run it through its paces here and kind of see what happens. Again, this one's different already. You can see it did not have the greatest amount of pickup there. The other thing you probably observed as we started going to that first corner is, it's a little sluggish. That, like I said, goes with that pickup piece. But the steering is kind of hard to use. Like, it has this kind of a deliberate sort of whoa to it. And we're sitting here, we're basically topped out at about 36 miles an hour going up a hill. Now, keep in mind, we intentionally did not bring a trailer this time. I was really tempted to run this with, like, tractor trailer trailers, like big things. And I realized there's no point in doing that because it's not really going to accomplish what I'm hoping to demonstrate. Instead, I just wanted to go, whoa. I think we're still going. I think we're still alive. I think our vehicle's still okay. Yeah, we're fine. Keep going. And again, what we wanted to see is just how these vehicles, when you remove them for the load, can and cannot succeed. So what are some of the things we've learned? I think for me, the biggest thing I've realized is the importance of the different types of transmissions. You've got your standard transmission, which is lovely. You've got your automatic transmission, which is also very, very effective. But having the ability to lock differentials, to have a range box, especially, range boxes are incredibly critical on vehicles like this because really without that extra little bit that you can kind of summon when things get really rough, you really are at a bad point. I'm going to crash. Whee! I knew that was going to happen eventually. And without that option, it really, really does hurt. Now, my thoughts on this, of course, like I said, very, very stiff ride. You would never take one of these things at speeds like this. This is just dangerous. And again, my point here is just to kind of show you how it sort of glides across the terrain here. Now, if I got myself a nice like sedan or something, tried to do this, I'd probably get annihilated. But that's, I guess, part of the fun. But we're doing fine. And I just want to point that out because when I go and drag the nicer version of this vehicle out, you'd be very surprised as to see that it doesn't really make that much of a difference if you have the basic fundamentals down. Oh my gosh, that was bumpy. And we're going to skip that one, and it's going to get really... Oh, I have probably bent the frame on this thing in so many ways, and wham, into the rocks. Excellent. So that was our 1946, and it's not bad. Like, did you see I was able to navigate? It was able to get myself going. Obviously, we crashed. But what we're really interested in seeing is what does 60 years of technology do for you? It gets you something like this. Now, you probably said, wait, why didn't you use your 2016 with the V16? Because that was silly. But instead, we get stuff like this that takes advantage of the same basic knowledge that we learned in the earlier generations. For example, we still have the range box. We still have the differentials. We also now have some safety features that will actually help make it more stable on the road. So let's go ahead and get going. One thing you'll notice right away with more technology, you'll get better engines. They're far more responsive. You'll also notice we have stability control here. As we're taking these turns, the computers are dynamically measuring the performance of the vehicle and making sure it goes in the direction that we actually point it. You'll notice that as I'm taking these corners and it's just tearing up the dust, it really has very, very little heart attack. And I'm not suffering as I'm ripping around these dunes at high speeds. So the big thing, too, that you probably observed is that the suspension is just better. It's much, much softer. It's taking the bumps just as well as the classic vehicle did. The only really difference between the two, other than the fact that this one's a lot less stiff, is the fact that this one kind of molds itself onto the ground. So even though you're getting bounced around all over the place, and you can see how I almost rolled this thing several times, I'm still completely in control of the vehicle, something that was a little different than some of our previous generations. Now, if you notice how I'm blasting over these curves, how you're not getting seasick anymore, other than my little undulations here. Again, not driving my keyboard here. But look at how easily it just hovers across the terrain. And that makes such a big difference to the actual performance of the vehicle. Without that capability, we'd be in a much, much, much worse place. Go ahead and enjoy our little turn here. We're going to get some bumpy bumps in a second like that. So the other thing you notice is how sensitive the steering is. in our earlier versions of these vehicles, we had, basically recirculating ball steering or rack and pinion steering. Modern steering, now we have power steering. Of course, we have anti-lock brakes, which are wonderful, wonderful tools to make things a little bit safer for us. And you can just see just how much more controlled the experience is, even though the speed is drastically higher. When we did our previous series, we were making basically passenger sedans. The problem we kept running into is as technology got safer, it became less drivable. Whereas in this, I would almost argue that not only did we get safer, but our performance increased and it became more drivable, which I think is a very, very kind of a neat sort of mix here. Now, it was very, very tempting to take out the 16 cylinders in this, but I won't, don't worry. So now you're probably saying, okay, so now that you've had a great experience and you've had a chance to really kind of play with it, what was your favorite decade of vehicle to produce? And that's a tricky question. And my reason being for that is, when we produced the sedans, there were obviously sedans that were more fun and they were safer to operate. And then with these, it was, could take the payload, which all the vehicles for the most part had no difficulty taking the payload. Where it really only differed was how safe it was. Of course, we had very, very high power that was very difficult to control. We had some lower powered vehicles that were a little easier to control, but they couldn't pull things up the hill. And you can see all those different differences. So, whoa, we're going to roll it again. So, of course, I keep dying, but that's a different issue. Again, driver error, that's not vehicle error or anything like that. So what are my conclusions? My conclusion is this. When it comes to light utility vehicles, modern technology has just made it safer, and it's made it better performance. I think that's kind of what I'm going to say. When people think of rallies and they think of rally driving, I'd much rather, I guess, spoke too soon. I'd much rather rally drive in something like this than one of those 1940s creations or the 1960s. I think we saw some pretty fun little things along the way. For example, we got to see the 1980s one was the first one that easily could totally beat the mountain climb. And we also saw, of course, some of the later generations where they got very, very stable. And of course, I was impressed with how durable these things were. Obviously, we're not coming back from that one, but consistently, I've driven these in terrible conditions, under terrible duress, and they've come back, and they're a little bounced around, a little nasty, but they work well. Now, of course, if I had to pick one, I'd probably pick this one as my favorite. Now, if we go back to the start for a second, let me show you why I don't pick the next generation of this, by the way. It's because it's too much. When I think of vehicles and I think of driving, I always like vehicles that are a good mix of drivability at the same time as that's something I can feel like, I'm not going to get myself in trouble. This thing is just too much car. And you can see from my first 10 seconds here that I've already totaled a car with a V16 engine inside of it. So that just gives you an idea. Yeah, the performance is there, and the performance is incredible in this vehicle. Of course, you can see the traction control is fighting me more than I'm actually driving, so they're restored so we get a little control. But it's just not. It's too much. I've created a vehicle that is, something you take on a performance racetrack. I created not a vehicle that makes sense in terms of light utility. You just can't take something that's this expensive with this much performance and drag it on here and expect not something bad to happen. A cylinder or something would overheat. Or in my case, as you notice, because we're so much heavier, we're just sliding all over the place here, and it's very difficult to control. Oh yeah, this would be definitely not a place. This is sort of the equivalent of when you see some of those luxury SUVs and got all the bells and whistles and they're still 600-700 horsepower. But it's a utility vehicle, folks. Would you want a giant dinosaur chomping on your $140,000 SUV? I mean, that doesn't really pass out the category. It's just something to think about. So I would say, yeah, absolutely. My favorite was the 20, or at least the knots. My least favorite was probably the 1950s one, which is an interesting inversion because in our previous exercise that I think was my favorite because it was just so raw. But it was the wrong combination of too heavy and not controllable. I almost did it that time. Oof. But other than that, this has been an enjoyable series. Perhaps we shall revisit some others. The question is, what kind of vehicle would I do next? I don't know. Enjoy.